So in this first week of IS-113, we will be going through the basics of HTML, how to build a static web page using HTML. The topics will include the basic structure of an HTML file and the elements that go into the file so that you can display something on Chrome. So to begin with, HTML is actually hypertext markup language. This is a way in which you could include links to other pages or other resources, and that is done using the famous URL as you see in the address bar of every single web page that you visit when you have it in Chrome or any browser that you have. So in HTML, the tags that will specify the markup of a particular element will have angle brackets. In other words, a markup language is something that is kind of self-documenting or self-describing as to how to display the document. So you have some text that needs to be displayed in bold or as a heading, then you just specify it around that block of text. And that specification is done using what we call a tag. And most tags in HTML come in pairs. So to begin with, the basic tag, of course, is just HTML. So HTML open tag in angle brackets, close tag, almost the same thing, except that there's a slash at the beginning of it. So that is the opening and closing pair. Start tag and end tag with angle brackets. So that's the basic structure. So every HTML file will have an HTML in the beginning and then HTML toward the end of the file. Although most tags are actually pair tags, there are some tags that are singletons. They are called self-closing tags. So the most common one is actually BR, which is a break, a line break, and HR, a counterpart, which is like a line break, but it also puts a line. It's horizontal rule. Then another very common one is IMG, image. So image just inserts an image, and it also is a singleton in a sense. It doesn't have something like close IMG. This one does not exist. So this one is not there. And another very common one is actually input. Input is the one that you use inside a form to specify different kinds of input elements like a text field or a password field, checkboxes, radio buttons, etc., etc. In HTML5, which is the latest and greatest version of HTML, this is the final version, you don't need to specify a slash at the end of the singleton tag, self-closing tag. Some people do specify it like BR with a slash and then closing angle bracket. This is just to indicate that this is a singleton. Don't look for a slash BR somewhere else because this is it. And this is not needed in HTML anymore because HTML5 actually says that the best practice is actually not to have that slash, but certain other languages that are stricter than HTML5 might require you to do that. So there's no harm in putting it there, but to me it looks a bit ugly, and so I personally wouldn't do it, except that the format that I use now, which I will get into in a little while, actually does it automatically. So that pisses me off a little bit, but I cannot actually fix it. Alright, so BR, HR, IMG, input, those are the main things which happen to be singletons or self-closing tags. Tags are not case sensitive in HTML, so you can use any kind of case, lowercase, uppercase, mixed case, but my recommendation is that you use lowercase. On the other hand, names of HTML elements such as input will be case sensitive because you actually use that in a program, in a JS program in our course later on, because form is a mechanism by which you send data to the server, and when the data is sent to the server, the name is actually used in some fashion, and there it becomes case sensitive. So names are case sensitive, but type is not, because type is just a way in which you're asking HTML to display that particular element. A bit confusing, such is life. Now, in order to actually access an HTML file, you need a server. So web is a client-server architecture. And when you want a page, you ask Chrome to get it for you. Chrome, on your behalf, will ask the server to give it to Chrome, and then the Chrome browser will display it for you. So it's a client-server kind of architecture, and for that reason in Node.js we will need a server. A server in Node.js is actually just a program, a JavaScript file that you launch using Node. So once you do that from a folder which contains server.js, of course, then that becomes the root from which you serve files. So this is a sample server.js that we don't need to understand completely at this point, even though the functional mechanism of how this works is not needed at this point. You will need to understand that in a couple of weeks. Let me just tell you what it will do. What it will do is that if you're asking for the resource from localhost in port number 8000, and if you don't say anything at all, so in Chrome you type in http localhost 8000 without a slash, or with a slash, it doesn't matter, slash is assumed, then it will just run this part saying hello from the server in your Chrome window. This is what you will see. And if you're looking for a file, it'll actually read the file and send the data in the file to you, but as text, which works for HTML files and text files, of course. But if the file happens to be an image file, this will actually mess up. So you will see something, but it will not be your image. But this is a very basic server that actually does this much for you. As I said, you will understand more about server.js progressively. By the time you reach week 5 or week 4, you will know this inside out. Our recommendation for the location where you should download and unzip the files from eLearn is C IS-113 if you happen to be on a Windows machine, or the desktop IS-113 if you're on a sensible operating system like Mac OS. And in there you would create week 1, week 2, etc. One thing you really have to keep in mind is not to have a space in the name. So if you put this in some cloud-based disk like OneDrive or something, the folders corresponding to those online cloud disks tend to have some spaces here and there, which works fine. The operating system will take care of it most of the time. But when you try to run it from a terminal by typing in node and the file name, if there is a space in the file name, then space being a delimiter for the command line language, that creates a problem, and then you will have to put quotation marks or escape the spaces or something. It becomes a bit messy, and that is unnecessary complication that you would like to avoid. So do not have a space or any special characters in the file name or folder names behind the files that you're working on. So in our examples, we will be starting a server, a given server, in each one of the example folders by typing in node server.js. Where do you type that in? That would be on a terminal. And where's the terminal? Terminal can be a terminal that you open, or a command prompt that you open on Windows, and then you navigate to the folder where you have your example files. Then you just type that in, or you could actually use Visual Studio Code, which does have a built-in terminal. We will see that in a second. Once the server is running, then you can access the file using the URL such as this one. So localhost 8000, that corresponds to the folder where the server is running. In this case, it's actually running in week 1, IS-113 week 1. Inside that you have a folder examples, and then example 2, and then some file, and that's what you're accessing. That's what you're requesting the server to give to you, which it will, and then you can display it, or rather Chrome can display it on your behalf. So let's take a look at example 1. I'm on a MacBook Pro. Here I have placed my IS-113 folder on the desktop. Inside that I have week 1. There I downloaded and unzipped the files that came from eLearn. So in there I have examples 1 through 6, and we're going to look at example 1. So I'm going to right click on it and I say open integrated terminal. Then I have the terminal open. I can see where the terminal is now running, the folder in which it is running, which is pwd print working directory in Unix like machines. So that's where it is, and it would be just cd on Windows. So in Windows, by the way, when you open it like this, what it opens is what we call a PowerShell. PowerShell is not appropriate for our purposes here. So you have to find this little plus sign toward the bottom right hand side corner. Click on the arrow next to it. In there on Windows you will see command prompt, so you have to click on it. Unfortunately for you, you're on Windows, and when you say command prompt, it will automatically cd you back to IS-113, I believe. Then you have to navigate back to week 1 and examples and example 1 in this case. So such is life for you. Now let's look at hello.html. This is the first file. So one thing we recommend is that you have to indent it, meaning you have to have these indentations kind of highlighting the structure of the file, and that is actually quite easy to do in Visual Studio Code. You right click and then you say format document, and you can see the corresponding keystroke, which is Alt Shift F. If you have a formatter defined, then it will do that. Otherwise, it'll invite you to define a formatter. In my case, I can say format document with, and Prettier is a formatter that you can download. It's an extension that you can download and install, which is very powerful. So that will work quite well. And HTML language features, I think, is a default formatter or default language helper inside Visual Studio Code. You can use that. If you use that, I believe we have already used it, so you will get it that way. But if you use the other one, format document with Prettier, which is the default, which means I can just say Shift Alt F, so it actually formats it using Prettier. It's slightly different, so it killed a couple of lines here and there, and so it looks like that. So you can use either. It's just that if you use Prettier, singletons like BR, suppose I had a BR here, and if I format it, it actually adds that slash, which personally I don't like, but Prettier will insist on doing that, and there's no way to customize it. There are good reasons behind why Prettier actually thinks that it's silly for you to customize a formatter, because if you're working in a team, if everybody is using Prettier and you go ahead and format the way you like it, and when somebody else wants to compare a different version of your file to see what changed, if the formatter has changed, a lot of lines would look as though it has changed. That is meaningless and is a waste of time. So Prettier by design doesn't let you do such silly things. Such silly things are called bike shedding, apparently. Bike shedding. Slide is basically telling you the structure of this file, starting with HTML, closing here, and it's got a header, and header's got an element, an HTML element called title, which is the one that will appear in the tab header. So my first web page appears there, and inside the body is what will appear in the body of the page. There I have hello world in H1, which is the largest heading level that we have. So hello world, and then we have a paragraph, and that is my first web page, and this is what it is. How do you actually see this? So in order to see this, you have to go to localhost hello.html. You have to make sure that your server is running. So luckily for you, the server is given to you here. So where to run it? In order to run it, you would just say node server.js. Now it is running, you can see it here, and you can go to localhost 8000. That says hello from the server. Where does that come from? That comes from here. If you haven't asked for anything else, which means you just went to localhost 8000, then it's supposed to send you hello from the server. On the other hand, if you actually have a file name there, in this case it's going to be hello.html, then you see that, oh, I have a bit of padding myself on the back there. That's because I had actually put it there. Excellent class prof, just to show my students what H2 meant. All right, so that's that. Now I have some more things that you can have there. I can have paragraphs, divs, strong, etc. So all these things are in a different file called text.html. So let's take a look at that one. Text.html has a bunch of things, and let's open this. How do you open this? You will go there, and instead of hello, you will just say text. So you see all those things. You have to go through this and kind of understand why certain things are displayed the way they are, and maybe get used to those tags, because those tags will come in handy in lab tests, etc. Another thing I want to show you is list. This is an unordered list, UL. A list, unordered list means bulleted list. And list items, those are the items inside the list, li. They are pair tags, ul, close ul, li, close li. And ordered list is ol with same li inside. So you see those things. So let's take a look at that one also. This is given to you in list.html. So let's just open it. Take a look at it. So that's what it is. And open it. You see that. Nothing earth-shattering there. Then there is an exercise that you can do to combine a couple of those things. In lab tests for questions related to HTML, we will specify what kind of tag you need to use. If those tags are specified, then you have to use those. If the tags are not specified, then you can just look at the screenshot and make a guess. So this you shall do on your own. Then there is exercise 2. To indicate that within an unordered list, you can have as a list item an ordered list. So bulleted list, numbered list, those things can be nested. In fact, anything can be nested in HTML. At least most things can be nested. Let's take a look at example 2. Here we're trying to show this little puppy and a link. So link is created using A, that is an anchor. A is an anchor, that is a pair tag. So open A will have an attribute. Anything that is a key value pair inside a tag is called an attribute. It's a key, href, value, a string, what that href is. Href is where the link is pointing to. And between the opening and closing will be the link text. So that will be click here, and that will go to example.com. And then images are created using self-closing tag called img. Again, that's got an attribute src that specify the image with respect to wherever the current file is. So the current file is in link.html in example 2. So the image is expected to be where the link.html file is in the current folder. So that is important to realize. And of course it's got an alt text, which means for whatever reason, if this guy is not served, then you can have that text rather than a broken image. Then you can specify the width and height, that is getting the browser to resize it for you. So let's take a look at this one. So this server we have to kill. So this is something I have to show you. If you actually directly went here and started a terminal, so you can have multiple terminals. Now this terminal is attached to example 2, and here if you try to start server.js, it actually gives you an error saying that I cannot listen on port 8000 because somebody else is already listening to that port. And who is that somebody else? That culprit is actually our example 1. So let's kill it. Killing it is Control-C. Then let's go to the other terminal and try running it again. This time it's working. Now let's take a look at example 2 server. This is the one that we are running. So it looks like it is that. Then the file that we're trying to open is link.html. Let's try to open this. So in order to open that, you will again go to localhost 8000. At this point, it is attached to example 2. There I have link.html. Open that and then I see that. And this is actually a link. By the way, you can actually look at the source code of the file, meaning the HTML code that creates this file by Command Alt U, I believe. Right, Command Alt U. So this is a file that is served by your server.js that came to Chrome, and then the Chrome read it and did whatever was asked of it. HTML, close HTML, head, title, static web page. So it actually said static web page there. Then it said website and rendered this as a link. So it said website and rendered that. And then these are comments, so those are just ignored. My dog, so it said my dog, and an image with the specified height and width and all that it just pasted there. I don't know if example.com is there, so this is just a domain that doesn't really do anything. If you wanted a better domain, let me highly recommend manoj.sg. Save it, reload it, and let's take a look at the source code. Now it became manoj.sg, and click there, voila. That would be my website. Now let's go to example 3. Here all we want to do is to illustrate the use of path names in links. Not merely in links, actually in resources like images and also targets in forms, etc. href in this case with a dot. Dot actually means the current folder. So in this case, you are in index.html. Where is index.html? That is here, that is inside slash, which is the root, and you want to link to lecture1.txt, which is inside IS-113. So in the current folder, which is indicated by dot, IS-113, in there you have lecture1.txt. So that's what's being done. So let's go to example 3 and take a look at this one. So kill the server here. Let's go to example 3 and run the server that is there. File name is called index.html. So now all I have to do is say index.html. This time it's going to come from example 3 folder. So it says lecture1, and if I click on it, this is lecture1.txt. Where is that coming from? This lecture1.txt is coming from IS-113. IS-113 lecture1.txt, and let's see it in a Visual Studio Code also. Example 3, this is a file that we opened, IS-113 lecture1, IS-113 lecture1. So that's what it is. That's what we saw. So the next example, suppose you have project.html. Now this is inside IS-112. You want to again link to lecture1. So project.html is in a folder IS-112, that is here. You have to go one level up, that is dot dot. Then you have to come down to IS-113. So dot dot is a parent folder. Then you come down to IS-113 and then you look for lecture1.txt. So dot dot means the parent folder. These things are all from Unix. Those of you who actually attended my class when I was teaching this would realize how dangerous these things are. Unix is an extremely powerful operating system, and it also assumes that you know what you're doing. If you mess up, you have the potential of messing up in a very deep fashion. You can be well and truly screwed. Okay, so that is a parent directory. So that is example 3, project.html. Let's open that. So it is project.html, but that was in IS-112 project.html. I need a slash there. So there also it says lecture 1. Let's look at the source code of this guy. So here lecture 1 is actually linking to .is113 lecture1.txt, and if you click on it, it actually gets to the same file is113 lecture 1, because it from is112 it went one level up and then it came down to is113. So that's the way to do this. Relative referencing, which is what this is called, is the right way of doing it, so that after doing your development on a development server, if you want to move it to a test server or a production server, you don't really have to worry about the absolute path names of different folders, etc. You just need to know the relative structure, which is likely to be unchanged. Now, one more thing, if you are in IS-113, you want to refer to lecture1.txt, you can actually start from a slash, which always stands for the root folder. So you can actually specify the absolute path name also. So let's take a look at IS-113 project.html. So IS-113 project.html, there says project for IS-113, and there is lecture 1, which links to an absolute path with lecture1.txt. On the other hand, extra is actually from the current folder. There is no dot there. If there is no dot, by default it means the current folder. By current I mean wherever the current file is. Project.html is here, so extra is actually a folder that is supposed to be there. Inside that you have extra.html. So that's the way it works. Current folder always refers to the folder in which the current file lives. So IS-113 project.html, IS-113 project.html is what we want to look at. Lecture 1, it goes to IS-113 lecture1.txt, but using an absolute path. Go back. Extras is IS-113 extra.html using a relative path without specifying dot, because dot was kind of assumed. So that stands for the root directory, slash. Then the fact that there is no dot doesn't matter, because one dot is assumed. If you don't say anything at all, it is a current folder. Now, example 4 is the way in which you define an element with an ID. So in this case, we are actually defining a link with an ID equal to bottom section, and somewhere near the top of the file, you have a link that just reads jump to bottom section. Bottom section is down here, and that is where it will jump to. So let's open this. So what we have is a file, HTML file. In the body, I have only two things. One link that just says jump to bottom section, and a lot of line breaks, so that I have a lot of blank spaces. And when I click on that, I expect the browser to go to the bottom section, make it visible. So by going to the bottom section. So example 4. So we have to go to example 4, kill this guy, go to example 4, and then run node server.js. So it's running there. And in example 4, I have id.html, which is this file. So now inside example 4, I have id.html. Jump to bottom section. I don't see bottom section here, but bottom section is actually down there. I'm just scrolling down. So if I click on it, it goes there to bottom section. The thing I want to highlight to you is the fact that I used a, which is an anchor, with an ID, and then I just put bottom section there. Now the fact that it is an a is kind of immaterial. It's just an HTML element with an ID, and what this link is saying is that in the current file, look for some element with an ID bottom section and go to that element. That is what this link is saying. So it's the same as saying id.html and hashtag that. So that thing is assumed because current file is the default for the current file. So you don't need that. And instead of a, I could have used any other kind of element. A is one convenient one. Span would be another one. Then of course it has to be closed with span, and just to make it obvious that I actually changed something, let me call it bottom section span. Save it and go back here, reload it, and I have bottom section span there, and click on it, it actually goes there. So the fact that A that you're using to specify an ID is kind of immaterial. It could be any HTML element. It should be an HTML element that doesn't actually change anything, so that the appearance doesn't change. A is one such thing if you don't have href, but also span is another one. It could be div or it could be anything. So hash is a way in which you can specify an ID. Just to show you that, I could say id.html. Let me just do it that way, and then span with id.html. Now let me go back here, reload it, click on it, then it goes there. So id.html is the default for the current file, which also tells you if you wanted to go to a different file that has a named element somewhere, named tag somewhere, even on a different server. So it could be, for instance, manoj.sg, index.php, portfolio. It actually goes there. So it can be a named HTML tag or element in any file, as long as you know that there is a name. Sorry, an ID, not a name, an ID. That's that. Now you have the same idea you have to do on your own in exercise number 3. Please do this, practice. Then tables. This is kind of a painful topic. You have table, close table, and in a table you have table rows, and then you can have table elements which will appear in cells, table cells. That is table data, and table header, which is almost identical to table data, except that when Chrome renders it, it will render it with bolding, as you see here, and centering in the cell. So that's that. Conceptually not very complicated, but when you do it, it's actually fairly tedious to get everything right. We almost always use border equal to 1 because we want to see the table. If you don't do that, the whole thing will be laid out as you see here, except that the borders will not be drawn, which means we cannot really see the table. Then there is t-head, t-body, t-foot, etc., specifying different rows semantically, describing them semantically, saying that this is part of the body, this is part of the header, etc. Good idea for accessibility, etc., but for our purposes in this course, we're not going to worry about it too much. Then one exercise to teach you the attribute called column span, which will let you span columns, and row span, which will let you span multiple rows, adjacent rows. So learn those by playing with exercise number 4. Now, one of the most important things that we will do in HTML are forms, because forms give you a way in which you can send data from the front end, from the HTML file, back to the server, and the server will have to deal with the data, and that dealing with the data is exactly what we are trying to learn in this course. So text field, you can type in anything, like suppose it's a name field, Manoj, or name of the course or whatever. Password field is identical to a text field. It's just that when you type in something, it will not be visible. Hidden field is a field which has a name and a value, which will send some information to the backend, but it will not show anything on the browser. You might wonder why we have that. I think in week 4 or week 5, I'll give you a use case where it's extremely useful. Then button, which is a pair tag, that is the way in which you specify a submit button. Label is a way in which you will add some usability features. Radio button, as you know, you have a gang of them, and if you select one, whatever else is selected is unselected. So only one of them can be selected. Checkbox, on the other hand, if you have a gang of them, you can select none, one, or many of them. That actually creates a problem in form validation, as you shall see later. Drop down list is a menu that you can drop down. Typically the first value will be the default, but you can actually change the default by specifying something else to be pre-selected. Similarly, you can have something pre-checked either here or here. Now, one thing you have to remember is that if there is a text field or password field or hidden field, these 3 things, when the form is submitted by clicking on the submit button or any other means that you know of, those fields will generate values in the backend. As I told you, forms are a means by which you send data to the backend, and these guys will create corresponding elements somewhere in the backend. It's just that if you don't have anything typed here, anything typed here, the value will be empty string, but the key will be there. It's always a key value pair. Key will be there, the value will be empty. On the other hand, in a checkbox or in a radio button, if you haven't selected anything, the whole key will be missing. That actually creates problems. I know that if you're watching this for the first time in this course, that statement may not make much sense, but if you're reviewing reviewing it for your lab test or something like that, at this point you probably will realize what I mean. So if you don't understand it now, it's okay, ignore it. But when you're revising your topics later in a couple of weeks, you will realize how important these things are. So here is an example where you will be creating a form. So a form has a name text box and it's got an email text box, and then there's a submit button. These are the three things. So let's take a look at this one. Again, we killed this guy. Oh, example 5 we didn't actually look at. That's just a table. Couple of examples there. Do that on your own. So what we want is actually example 6. Launch the server there. And in example 6, we have the first form, which is this guy, name and email. And you see that I have this thing that says label for name. Name is the ID of an element here. For that guy, I am specifying a label. Name part, that is just a text, will actually be treated as a label for this guy. And label for, that for attribute will take an ID. The difference between a name and an ID is that names can be duplicated. They are not unique, but an ID has to be unique in a page. It's a unique ID. So when you say label for name, there's no confusion. There are no other elements with the ID name. Cannot be. If you do have them, that would be a syntax error. Well, HTML browsers are actually extremely tolerant. It won't tell you that there is an error, but it's not going to work properly. So you might wonder what's the big deal with that. I'll show that in the browser. We shall go to localhost form.html. Now, in order to type in something, obviously you have to click in here and then you can type in whatever you want. That is fine. But if you have defined this as the label for this, by clicking on that, it actually goes there. So that is the only usability thing that a label gives you. Here also same thing. Just for the sake of completeness, let me actually show you another way in which it can actually be implemented. So let me modify this a little bit. Instead of saying for that, let me start my label there. So there's no for attribute there. And let me move this closing label tag after this. So it's kind of simple. It's just a label between this and this. And that's it. Let's see how that works. So I have to go back here, reload it, just to make sure that I actually reloaded the form. It has been saved, etc. Let me change something here so that we can see it. Name label, I would call it. So it's name label, so it's a new thing. Now I click on it, it actually goes there. So the for attribute is the right way of doing it, but that's a bit heavy in terms of how much typing you have to do. So just by bracketing the element and the label in label is actually good enough. In some cases, it may not be possible to do it that way, especially if the name is in one place and the text box is actually in a different place. So you might have to use for with the ID, but in most cases you can get away with bracketing the element and the label in label. So let me do that for email also, just so that I can show you something else. So here I'm going to delete the label thingy here. Then I reformatted it, so as you can see these things became a slash, something I don't like, but that's okay. Now I want to bracket this, enclose this in a label. So I select what I want to bracket with label, then I do Shift Command P and then wrap with abbreviation emet something. Then I type in label and that does the whole thing for me. Just have to delete that for thing and that works. Then I can save this just to make sure that I'm getting this updated. So let me put a label there so that there is something visible for you to see that I'm not pulling a fast one on you. So reload with label and click on it and that works. So that was example 6, the last example. Then we have a password form and a hidden text. So there's a hidden field and a password field. So these are all inputs of type password or type hidden. By the way, the default type, if you don't say anything at all, it's a text box. So this is a password hidden example. So let's open that. So that's what you see. ID password for label, type password, that is a type so that when you type in something, it doesn't echo it. Name password is something that you need so that the information can go back to the server when you submit it. Here also name is important. Here ID certainly is not important, and the label also is kind of superfluous because this input element is not going to be visible because it is hidden. So let's open this. That is called password hidden.html there. The only thing to show here is if you type in something that is not a code, so people don't see this by standing behind you and watching your screen. Now I'm going to submit this, but we have to see what's being submitted. Submit it. You see the password there. So that's what I typed in. And there's hidden text equal to nothing. So why is it nothing? Because here I said input type is hidden, name is hidden text, but there's no value there. So let's put a value saying Manoj hidden. Now let's go back here, reload this, and password I'm going to put in 12345. Hidden text is already there in the file. I'm not typing anything. I cannot because it is hidden. Then I say submit. Then you can say Manoj hidden. So this is a mechanism by which I can program a string to go back to the server. So whatever you see here, key value pair, will be sent back to the server. Password also is sent back to the server. So later you will realize how you handle these things on the server side, which is the name of the game. So we are doing backend programming, dealing with data that is coming from the user on the server side. Next thing is a text area. So that file is called textarea.html, obviously. So that is a textarea.html. So all you have there is a text area. Again, got an ID, name. ID is not that critical, but name is, and then some attributes specifying the size and some value that is default. So that will appear when you load this for the first time, as we shall do here. Text area.html, no comments, and if I type in something, yes comments, then that becomes yes comments here with some encoding of that space there and a line break there, etc. So that's what is going to the server. One thing to realize for text area also is this: if you delete everything and there's nothing, it's completely empty, and you submit, you see that comment with nothing after that is being sent to the server. That means on the server side there will be some object with some property called comment, but that value of that property is going to be an empty string. The property will exist, it won't be undefined, and that kind of thing will become important to you later in life, in a couple of weeks. Then I have a radio button. These things I'm not going to actually show it to you on the browser, but I'll just explain it to you using the slide here. So type is radio, so these are radio buttons, a bunch of radio buttons. They are connected using the name, so they all have the same name. That means there is just one gang of radio buttons, which means if I select red, then if something else had been selected, that would be unselected. And you also see this attribute called checked. That means when you load it for the first time, that particular radio button will be checked. So in this case, blue will be checked. Okay, having said that, I wouldn't show this to you on the browser. Let me show this to you anyway. So this guy is called radio.html, radio.html. So blue is selected because we had blue pre-selected. This file was this guy, blue was checked. So let me just show you that that is indeed the case by pre-selecting green. Now if I reload it, green will be selected. On top of that, if I check on red, green gets unselected and red gets selected. That's because they all have the same name. But if I call this by different names, 3, I reload this, it looks identical. But if I select something else, this guy doesn't get unselected because they're not ganged together. They don't have the same name. So having the same name is important if you want them to work as a group. Checkbox, almost identical to the radio buttons. You can have checked attribute to pre-check something, and name has to be the same so that on the server side you know that all these things belong together. So no need to see this in the browser. If you do, just select is the one that will create a drop down. So select is a pair tag, select and close select, and that has to have a name, and then you have options within. There are also pair tags, so whatever you type in between will appear as the drop down menu, and associated with each one of them there is a value. If you don't have the value, if these things did not exist, then whatever you have as a body of the element option will become the value, which is kind of neat. This maybe I should show it to you. So select RGB and pre-selected green. Select green is pre-selected, red and blue, and you can submit it. You select red and submit it. I see color equal to R. Why R? Because the value corresponding to that red is actually capital R. Now I want to show you one more thing. I delete the values for all of them, reload this. Green is still pre-selected. This looks identical, and suppose I select red and submit, then the value becomes red because red is the content, as it were, of the element, because I didn't have value. So value is up to you. If you're happy with whatever you have here, then you don't have to specify the value. The last thing I want to show you here, green is selected, but if I remove the selected attribute from green and reload this, then the first one is selected. By default, the first one is selected. So something to keep in mind. So now you have an exercise to actually put many of these things together. You might wonder how you align this. That is using something called NBSP. And you might wonder how you have these grayed out things there. They're not values, they're called placeholders. That's an attribute. So play with those things to understand that. Same thing here, exercise 6. So play with that. So the key points, we have Tags, most of them are pair tags. Most tags come in pairs. So H1 through H6, 6 different levels of heading. Paragraph, div is a logical or semantic section. Then list, unordered, ordered with list items within. Anchor, most important thing on the web that will create links. So anchor tag. Then form, the most important thing for us in this course because we are trying to send data from the front end to the back end and then deal with the data. Table, very common thing in most web pages so that you can lay out data in nice format. A table pair tag contains rows specified by tr, which contain cells specified by table data td, or table header that is identical or almost identical to table data except that they are rendered differently by the browser. Then button is the one that we will use in this course for submitting anything. Then paths apply to all resources. Dot or nothing at all is the current folder. Dot is the parent, and if you don't have either and you start with a slash, that means the root. Wherever the server is running, it starts from there. So that's that. So these are the basics of HTML. I have one more video that I will keep in this playlist. That is actually from my last year's run. And the HTML description there might be slightly different, but it's also more exhaustive. There is more there. So take a look at that one. And whenever there is a difference between how we specify, especially the names of certain form elements, the one that you have in JavaScript, of course, supersedes the one that you had in the other video, which is actually specifically for PHP. So that's all for now. All the best to you.